Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachulam Pangulangete Girim Yatkripatam Aham Vande Shri Guru Dinataranam Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripasunda Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. So again, thank you so much for joining every day. As we always give thanks as we start, this is again an opportunity for us to show respects to all our teachers, to each other, and to an opportunity for us to all request to maximize our potential and for those that we come into contact with in the course of the day. As we always do, our culture is full presence, respect for everyone that has come forward, and the determination to do the work that comes to us. And I always like to remember the things we should try to remember is the good others have done for us to keep us in the space of gratitude, the not so good we may have done for others to keep us in the space of always wanting to grow and be better. And the two things we should always try to let go of are the bad we may have done, others have done to us, and the good we potentially have done for others, so we don't rest on the laurels. So again, thank you so much for joining today. I wanted to start off today by just going to the beginning of the book, and as we have been doing a couple sessions, but not everyone, just reading out the 10 principles of characteristics of authentic leaders. And if someone wants to read, that's on page 18 in the newest book, but for everybody, it's going to be at the beginning. And if someone is wanting to read, I'd be happy to let them go. Please, Avni.
Before going any further, let's pause and consider some universal characteristics of authentic leaders. Number 1, they love people and are sensitive to their emotions and needs. Number 2, they help people feel happy and secure. Number 3, they create lasting value at all times. Number 4, they are philosophers. They seek to convey ultimate abiding truth. Number 5, they lead from the inside out, knowing that character is power. Number 6, they are principled, centered. Number 7, they are powerful visionaries. Number 8, they keep everyone engaged according to their propensities. Number 9, they are experts and at delegation and empowerment. Number 10, they are servant leaders who leave behind a culture of enduring excellence.
Thank you. So it's good to reflect on these each session. I have to learn them all, or I'm trying to learn them all by memory. So this is also helpful for that. What we wanted to do today was just, we've gone through quite a bit, and since Ed's not able to join us, we wanted to kind of do a recap of what we've done over the last 7 weeks. And we wanted to start with, I'm just sharing my screen here. If you remember in the introduction, there's this line from, it's 3.21 from the Gita, but it states, whatever an action a great person performs, common people follow, and whatever standards they set by their exemplary acts, all the world pursues. Does everyone remember this one? So this really very much has to do with the principle of trying to be that example for others to follow. It's very much in line with Gandhi's statement, if everyone knows the famous line, be the change you want to see in the world. So I think of this this quote from Gandhi when I read this line. And I just wanted to start with that as an opening. Did anyone have any specific reflections on the 10 principles we read or this quote that they wanted to share? All right. So if you remember, what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the specific instructions that have been shared by Bhishma Dev, and they essentially are the quoted parts and at the top of each section. And what I was hoping that we could do is we could just take a minute for our own reflection and to consider how we would like to, take our next step in each of the sections. And so this will be a little bit of a review of each principle, but we'll start with the first one. If everyone remembers the first one, I mean, I'll just make reference to the page, but the top heading tells you the section. The first quote was, "Some of the most intricate knots of the mysteries of the universe are wrapped up in leadership. It is not easy to rule well. A king's one worldly duty is to rule well. He is essentially a person or man of action." And so this again here is very much emphasizing the point that leadership is very much tied to what it's not one of just ideas, it's one of action and movement. So everyone is probably working on a specific area of leadership of their life, and perhaps you're wanting to move forward on something. I just wanted for everyone to reflect on potentially one thing they would like to do to be that, to take that step or that action in an area. Because again, it's stated in this section of the book that there's a lot of complexities to doing this service well of leading. And that, again, I really like this point about the mysteries of the universe are wrapped up in leadership. It means that there's so much to unlock in this journey of leadership. But again, this duty of the leader is to do it well. And I wanted everyone just to reflect on this one for a second. I'll just read one of the short sections that really highlight some of the principles in this section. In ancient times, people trusted their kings because they were clear about the king's duties and activities. People understood the consequences of illegal or improper actions, and they trusted the king to help them in their times of need. Such clarity allowed people to be at ease while performing their duties and to be inspired in their own dutiful occupations by the trust that the king himself was dutiful and honest. Tremendous problems result when there is no proper leadership, like family without parents, where the children are left without protection or guidance. All right, I'm going to move on to the second principle because we have a few to get through. This was the second principle, or the second piece of advice that Bhishma Dev had left. And this one is at the top of page 39. A king's duty is to the gods. Next, and of equal importance, is the duty to truth. Truth is the highest refuge. All the world rests on truth. And basically, this point is an encapsulating point that we have, there's so many people that are going to come into our lives, and there's many people that we have to lead. But ultimately, the leader's duty is one of a spiritual nature, and that we have a higher accountability beyond even the people that we're leading. One of the sections that really stood out in this section that I'll just read: material truths are relative, and this often causes ambiguity. For example, Bhishma Dev says that kings should know how to conceal their plans, and that yet they should know to be diplomatic. At the same time, he states that a king must place great emphasis on the pursuit of truth. Although these two statements are contradictory, we would understand that Bhishma Dev is instructing Yudhishthira how to manage the material world with an intention of bringing about the highest good. This is analogous to managing a prison. The material world is essentially a prison of conditioned souls. It is filled with living entities with criminal mentalities who use and abuse what God has provided without giving him credit or accepting that they are accountable to him. The king's main concern is to rehabilitate the prisoners. Managing the material energy is really about helping the criminals become free. Rehabilitation can be enacted by a variety of methods. So again, the point here of reconciling, how do we be truthful and also sometimes have to conceal our plans, and that very much is dependent on the emphasis here is always that the leaders also not just wanting to look at the material comforts of those that they're leading, but ultimately their spiritual well-being as well. And that's a really important point to consider. The next point here is a true leader is above duplicity. A king should be both straightforward in both words and conduct. I wanted just to reflect on this point and just have everyone think about, in their day-to-day lives, do they do this? And if this is difficult, what makes it difficult? If anyone wanted to share. Please, Stacy.
I think some of it, when you dig deeper, right, is that we get in our own way. I mean, when you're aiming to be a leader and you want to, what you say and what you do, you want to have incongruency. What happens is we're trying to do all these things, but deep down, it's like there's the self-doubt that creeps in, and there's the questions and the feelings of unworthiness, and those creeping in tend to then make it feel like there's incongruency, right? Because you're acting in a certain way, trying to be a model for others, but yet, you have these feelings. And so I think that's why, like, the morning routine that we put in and times like these when we're talking together as leaders, and the teachings that Ed has given us are so helpful, because anyone can be a leader, but you have to be insular to that self-doubt that it just is the part of the human experience that's going to creep in. You have to have ways of keeping that from going into a downward spiral.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because in our attempt to lead others, we're always going to be a challenge in a way that our weaknesses may also be exposed. And those are the times where we need that fortification of both our mind and our will to keep going in a way where that incongruency doesn't happen, right? Because we'll always be challenged in a way where our words and actions sometimes may come to a crossroads. And so, yeah, that's a really great point about what you were saying, just how sometimes it doesn't always happen, right? And that self-doubt really is that kind of root. And having company of like-minded people is really important, I think, to help also overcome that as well, because we need a space where leaders can also be honest about what their challenges are and what they're going through. So thank you. Avantika?
Yeah, when it comes to duplicity and being straightforward and honesty and integrity and all of those wonderful things, I think there's a lot of over-indexing in that area, which probably, the last 1,000 years on the planet we've seen. And I see a lot of correction happening in that area. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I was doing, an analysis of lexicon, right? So as you just as part of some research, I was doing an analysis of what were the words most commonly used year on year over the last decade. And it was so interesting to see that somewhere in 2015, the word misinformation and gaslighting suddenly became very, very popular around the world, in English language. And I think the tolerance, first of all, there's almost like, the emperor's new clothes. It's like the bubble's being broken. So any leader's ability to, peddle misinformation as this thing, I think that the world is so much more aware now. So coming from there, 2015 onto, I recently saw a speech by Putin in Russian when he was talking about, certain strategic ploys by, let's say, two axes in the world, right? So one axis has a certain privileged style of leadership, and the other axis is currently it's kind of emerging from previously downtrodden societies and cultures. And it was very interesting for me to see that in today's modern day age, we can no longer just assume that what's being spoken about is the gospel truth just because it is coming from a king's mouth or a leader's mouth or the church's mouth or anything like that. I think that this is an autocorrection. So if this was important a few years ago, it's even more vital right now because people have zero tolerance for this sort of thing. And my estimate is that even when it comes down to our own leadership of our own selves, we should be questioning the lies we've been telling ourselves about us. It's little delusions, it's little blind spots and things like that. And then, it's blowing that up at the level of the family and the community, blowing that up at the level of society, blowing that up at the level of nation, and then, global relationships. So, I just thought I'd bring that perspective in that it's, I see an over-indexing, in propaganda and misinformation over the last 1,000 years. And I see a correction happening over the last 5 to 7 years. And it's just something very vital to know, which brings me to the fact that while, it's great to kind of, there are two powers at play. One is, great leadership, but it's also, the flow of the stream also. So great leadership on its own can achieve nothing if it's not in alignment with the flow of where the universe is going and where, where there is, where the corrections are happening. So that's something I just wanted to because otherwise one can become very egocentric and come up with these 10 principles that we must follow and become great leaders. I think it's most important to take a look at the context that we're part of, where we are, what is our role, what is the flow of the stream that we're swimming in, and as leaders apply those principles to that context.
Yeah, it's a great point that many of the principles we read about are from ancient times of Antika, and I think applying a principle to a given time, place, and circumstance is really vital. One of the things I was reminded of when you were talking about is, when you talk about this, I see also social media being as part of that, that correcting, where now, people may say things behind closed doors, but when you have a video show up in the news, or when you have a live video showing up from the actual situation or scene, there's not much one can then say to kind of cover or circumvent the reality that's already out there, right? So I think obviously sometimes too much is shared, but I think in that regard it is helping a lot more to bring about accountability and straightforwardness, because if one is trying to conceal, there's someone with some footage to be able to disregard what's been potentially put out there, right?
Absolutely. And just one last point that I'll make over here is that the word truth, it needs to also be questioned. because we're more and more living in a world where there is more polarity and more complexity around the world too. One person's truth is actually another person's lie, or so I think that what we are the need now is to come up with leadership that can be really conscious to its responsibility in what to align with, and how to utilize these polarities, and how to keep because what happens when different versions of truths clash with each other, the biggest crisis, as we're seeing right now, is that there's huge conflict, because people will go to any extent to defend their truth, right? So their big belief, their faith, that at some point it kind of always comes down to like, I'm good and you're not good. But so when one is in the, whether one is in charge of a team where, there's inter-team dynamics in politics, or whether one is leading a country where there is, the West versus the East, let's say, whatever one is in charge of, it's important to kind of first and foremost, not take truth at face value as how it was presented by the predecessors, the most popular definition of it, the most convenient definition of it, but to see, I think this is where, to perhaps what is good for the greatest many. The first, in this whole loaded thing of truth, the first thing is to identify which truth serves the people the best at this point. It's more complex than that, but yeah, for the sake of conversation, I will speak.
Thank you. Did anyone else have anything to add or reflect on? All right. So this was the next principle or next piece of advice I was given. It's on the area of balance. There's a danger in mildness. The king should be not be too mild, or he will get disregarded. The people will not have enough respect for him and his words. He must always avoid the other extreme of being too fierce, for then the people will fear him, which does not create a happy state of affairs. So this point is really powerful because it really has to do, I think, if you remember what we did to elaborate on this, I'll just bring it up. But this was really the section where we went into the exercise of the leader both understanding its responsibility, at the same time being assertive and not too soft, because that not having a strength of character here will also lead to being disregarded, and then being too strong will also be kind of going too far the other side. And I think we've all experienced this in our day-to-day life, with people even potentially we've even worked with in a leadership position. Does anyone have anything to share on this specific point on how they've been able to balance the two sides of assertiveness and yet not being too fierce in their respective positions as leaders? Yes, please. Stacy?
I think a lot of it is about asking questions. I was seeing somewhere we talked here about the concern for the spirituality, right, of the spiritual wellness of the people. And I think as we approach leadership as service, it helps to then lead people, but not be too assertive, right? Because as you seek first to understand and ask questions, oftentimes it makes people then open up and feel comfortable and trusting, and then they're more able to receive what you have to give, because I think forcing it on anyone is just not, in the long term, it's not going to really work, right? And so it's much better if someone can come to you, you know, and so that's, I guess, what I found, kind of use that coaching way, that a coaching approach. And then, you know, people still, there comes a point, you can find what you need always within yourself, right? But people want answers though. And so you can, I think, lead people, and then, you know, as they want something definitive, you can then offer that as they're able to then receive it because you've created that fertile ground for them to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the coaching approach is definitely one really effective way. I was just thinking that, you know, as a leader, they have to maintain some standard, or a standard of the direction you're going in. So leading by example is always, I think, a very powerful way. And at the same time, this idea that you're talking about, I think a lot of coaching is about meeting people where they're at, right? And so it's definitely like a tension to balance of trying to bring people up to like a standard. And I think in that regard, most times, if I don't know if people have found, but I think usually the reason why a lot of people cannot act is there's just a lack of education. So I think one of the roles of the leader at all times is just continuous education of those that are leading. And it's a repetitious act that I think sometimes, I know for me myself, sometimes I take for granted that, you know, it's so familiar or aware to me, and I've said it maybe 5 or 6 times, but you know, it's still that kind of messaging and that education, I think, is really important to move people, because as you were saying, Stacey, people are all at kind of different phases of when the light bulb may go off, right? And kind of want to do something for themselves in terms of changing.
And I think when you talk about leading by example, that's part of how they can connect the dots, right? Because just knowledge, it's like you say, you just repeat something over and over again, but if it's not in the way in their language, in the way they would say it, or they just don't know how to apply it, then you end up with that, you know, that bridge that has a piece missing, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think the leading by example can help people, and especially if you can help them to see how you're demonstrating that by example, then it gives them something that they can model.
The knowledge, and then the application of the knowledge. People need to see what it looks like in real life.
Right.
Any other comments from this section?
I think in this leading by example, it's also important in which culture you are grown up. For example, I grew up in a fear culture, so where the authoritarian people set examples which many taught, and now we are seeing the outcome, which kind of leaders are coming out of this culture. So this is, I think, very important. While we are setting the example as a leader, that we have to ask for ourselves and also examine ourselves in every step, I think.
I was saying that was a really good point, because the culture of a particular part of the world and its people really make a difference in how things get applied. I mean, I will definitely say that which part of the world are you referring to? Are you referring to specifically like Germany, Austria?
Turkey.
Turkey. You've lived in so many places, I forget now which part of the world you're
First 18 years of my life.
Yeah.
Dominant and it is it is a very mixture culture, but it's also dominantly fear dominant culture. So,
Mhm.
and it is very it's not easy to change also within yourself and within in the whole society.
Mhm. Yeah, I can definitely say, at least from like Indian culture's perspective, there's also very much, like you were saying, it was driven over decades from a fear-based space. And I'm not sure what others may think, but I feel, at least in that part of the world, that's also been shifting over time, especially recently. Jide?
Hey, Ricken. Yeah, I just wanted to build on, I think, what others have said. I think there's two reflections for me on that last quote there. I think the first one is on situational leadership. And the way I see it and the way I try to frame it for myself is different situations require different leadership styles. So I know that might be a simplistic way of looking at it, but it's been sort of one means where I try to wrap my head around it. So, perhaps in a work situation where, you're dealing with someone who perhaps responds more to the fear-based leadership style, perhaps the assertions that you make or your way of communicating with that individual has to be adapted to a certain extent, so you can make that connection versus the opposite of that, where there's more of a perhaps collaborative or a milder, calmer approach to leadership. And I almost want to extend that to the last comment on different parts of the world. Where leadership in certain Eastern countries, it's more rule based. It's here's the law, you follow it, versus perhaps in certain parts of the West. I know I'm generalizing a bit, where it's more about collaboration. It's more about consensus. It's more about getting everyone on board. I do agree with your point on that changing. I think we're seeing that in the world now, where the more top-down approach to leadership is being challenged, because I think that it has to be situational. Leaders in top-down with top-down leadership styles will need to learn to adapt to be able to bring people along. So that's sort of my reflection and framework in looking at that topic.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And I see your point about, different situations requiring a different approach, especially with people. And that's, this point we're coming up to that he's going to talk about is just knowing the individuals that we are working with is really vital, because everyone's going to respond slightly differently.
And there's always a tension there, I think. And I don't think that goes away at any point.
Yeah, I think becoming comfortable with that, balance of mildness and not being too fierce, that it's something that's showing up all the time, whether it be not even in the work setting, it also comes up with friends and family as well. Where sometimes when the relationship becomes too familiar, then it's really easy for us to go to the fierce side, in my experience. All right, I'm just going to move to the next quote. This was the next one. A leader must be compassionate but strong. Compassion must be a part of the leader's mental makeup, but he must guard against displaying too forgiving nature, because then we will be considered weak by his low men, and they will take advantage of him. So this section really has to, it's emphasizing that idea of being, I would say it's similar to the last point, that compassion is really the, the foremost quality of a leader, where they have to be forgiving and tolerant and patient, but at the same time not coming across as sentimental, because that, he's saying here, a leader who is too sentimental is actually a disservice to the people. And he cites examples of corruption, specifically in Africa. But here we're talking about, again, this balance here of being assertive, yet not and not too, but at the same time not overly weak. Jide, did you have something else to add, or is your hand?
Sorry, Akin. No, I'm all good.
Okay, Avantika?
I'll take it down.
Yeah, I think back to Mano, there's instead of the conjunction but, I would use and. So I don't think that compassionate and strong are necessarily, counterintuitive to each other. In my experiences, in my arc as a leader, I began as the younger, member of the team that I was part of and leading. I'm talking about my early 20s, and my nature was to be very soft-spoken and not at all confrontational. And then when I was flung into situations, I realized very quickly, because I went through that whole spectrum of wanting to be the person who's liked, the popular person, the ego to please kind of thing. I went through that spectrum as well in the beginning of my career, and then I realized very quickly that there were situations in which my team did not need me to be nice, they needed me to be competent. And I think that's what has stayed, is that there is a need to be competent throughout everything. And that is, it comes with three things. Yes, situational, absolutely agree with Jide, that it is situational, because you cannot be like, but there's this whole concept of power distance, which I learned the complexities of. Because initially when it started off, I was so averse to the idea of any power distance, because to me, anybody who felt like the boss or kept, a space between them and the rest of, the thing, it was something that was not part of my mental makeup. It was a cognitive dissonance that I had to overcome. And I saw like two polarities. One, the kind of people who were just the boss and would keep their people outside, and then people who were just, friends at the bar kind of situation with their teams. And I realized that the good leaders that I had and who I wanted to be like were people that were approachable and kind, but also in certain way competent. And sometimes that came with a level of intimidation, because, what intimidation kind of as a sense of thing, and that's a very negative sounding word, but I found that I got the most high performance and high emotional, contrarily high emotional journeys in the teams I led were when I was approachable yet intimidating. And to master that, the biggest sacrifice I had to make was to let go of my need for affiliation, because people have certain needs, like psychological needs. And one of the needs that my personality was pushing me into was a need to be liked, a need to have friends, a need to be popular or have affection from whatever workspace I was in. And I think one thing that people don't understand about leadership is that sometimes you've got to make sacrifices. You have to absolutely put the needs of the people that you're leading before your own. And sometimes that means even going contrary to what your personal nature would be. So I just wanted to bring this in, because a lot of people, I see half the group here is also women. And sometimes, women find it more difficult to thread that balance, because either you have to go into the territory of being extremely you know, we all have seen the alpha female leaders, some of them who become more masculine than feminine, they kind of this thing. We've also seen the, you know, the shy what do you call them, that aren't taken seriously by their teams because of whatever. So I think that it's important for everyone to understand that this is not about you, it is about the responsibility that you are leading. And sometimes that comes with a very, very competent understanding of what power distance serves the team. Because otherwise there's going to be biases, there's going to be a lot of breakdowns in the dynamics within the team.
Yeah, I was really appreciating that point, and it came to me as in my work as physicians, so much of our work is based on trust that we develop with patients, and it's often said that, and I'm sure everyone has seen the physician, that trust is kind of a combination of both competence and care, because we've seen the caring physician that's not competent, and we've seen the competent physician that's not caring. And so I was just really appreciating the point of Avantika. You were saying that leading sometimes where competence is actually what's needed, and yet that competence may also be intimidating to others, right? Usually when we try to move into that space of striving for excellence, being the best, it's you know, because again, in the work world, so many people are just accepting and being okay with just mediocrity, right? And so, yeah, thank you for just bringing, you know, just highlighting that point of this balance of two. And it just reminded me of this, you know, this equation of care and competence really being, you know, the fusion of these two, bringing about trust. And I think, you know, this trust is really important in, you know, in any area that we're trying to lead in, but it has to be balanced by these two. Stacy?
And I love what you said, Avantika, about the need for affiliation. And I think that's why forums like this, where we can meet as leaders, are so important, right? Because that's where you can get the affiliation. You're not going to necessarily be able to play the same role with the people that you're leading, right? Because you need a chance to, like a mastermind, where you can bounce things off against people and things. And so some of that, that's just not dialogues that you can have with people that you're leading oftentimes, because it does then make you seem like you're not competent, but it really is just that you're getting to your next level, and you need to figure out kind of how that how to approach that. And so that's why I think these kinds of forums are incredible for that need, to satisfy that need that we all have for affiliation, right, in various degrees.
Yeah, and it just speaks to the point that sometimes as leaders, it gets lonely at the top, right? Or with whatever we're trying to do. So this type of regular company is just, I think, really vital for leaders to feel supported and nourished. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up as well. Jide, did you have your hand up? Because I just wanted to make sure your camera's off.
I did. I think I just wanted to comment and appreciate what Avantika said about you know, the balance between competence and the need for affiliation and being liked. I think mine was more of a question maybe to the group on, you know, how have you navigated the dynamic of, I'm not going to say intimidation, but what was the source of the intimidation that you present to the world that sort of drives that perception of you being a balanced leader? I hope my question makes sense.
I would say, I mean, in terms, I mean, if I'm understanding the question correctly, and, you know, how does that intimidation come about? In the world, you know, where I work in healthcare, I would say it's about having a high standard of care and bringing that high standard on a consistent basis. having a high standard over time is, I think, not easy for anybody. But that high standard usually brings about a certain level of, a lot of times people just define physicians in terms of, oh, they're good and they're not good, but good usually refers to they have a certain level of respect for this, a certain level of standard that one brings to their work on a consistent basis. And I think for others, I know, because, everyone talks, is that can also be seen as something that people, in one sense, have a hard time keeping up with. So there's definitely a sense, there's always, I feel like that sense of comparison is always there. And, one has to decide really at what level they want to operate, regardless of what's going on around them. So that was just, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's how I see intimidation sometimes coming about, is just through trying to bring a high level of competence.
Competence being the source of it. Yeah, that's it does.
Avantika?
Yeah, great question. So I think some of the examples of that, Jide, from my specific experience, one of them has been that, both, the leaders that I've been the most intimidated of, or the leaders that I have been the most afraid to disappoint, and it works both ways. Similarly, situations in which my teams have been the most mindful of, working to meet my expectations have not been when I've been, they've been when that leader, or when I myself have been the most, what can you say? Integrity, I guess, is one thing, but it's also about the self-fulfilling prophecy, the positive reinforcement. So you don't want to disappoint the leader who believes so much in you. So when I have been the most, I think that one of the tricks that I learned was, when you expect people to give their best to you, they will do anything to meet your expectation. When you're trying to, show them the worst that they can operate at, they will prove you right there as well. So I think self-fulfilling prophecy is something that that works with. And again, I think that competence comes from you being really good at what you do, and then just fueling your team in a way that they believe that they can do so much better. And then they are so afraid of not doing what they have now dreamt of and envisioned. So creating that vision, that planting that seed of vision of what their best can look like, that creates a huge expectation within themselves of wanting to meet that. I don't know if that if that answered your question.
Absolutely, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, Avantika, I was just thinking about this principle of empowerment that you're talking about, and having a vision of what you see in others that's even beyond what they see and think of themselves. And that consistent empowerment I see also as potentially an intimidating factor, where someone else sees it, but ultimately they have to see it as well. And that, bringing that people to a place can be, I think there's a balance between, there's an intimidation factor, but also there's an aspect of inspiration, because you're being moved into a space that that you don't have the vision to see, but that encouragement is there. So thank you. That's a really great point. Thank you for sharing that. Stacy, you had something else to say?
Yeah, I was just thinking of that, the way that we're motivated, right, as human beings, is to seek pleasure and avoid pain, right? And so that was what was striking me, according to the combination of the intimidation and then the inspiration, right? Because it is like what you were saying, Avantika, about how you instill this belief someone, you paint this picture of this future that is just this incredible future they want to move toward, but then there's also this intimidation factor. And I think if it's that's kind of you want to avoid the pain, right? You want to avoid the, getting fired or not getting your raise or getting publicly somehow called out, right, as not having done something that you had committed to do, right? So I think that balance is, in fact, what is going to really drive people forward, because it's also embedded in human psychology.
Any other points to share on this? A really good question, Jide. I was just thinking that, and when we move into that space of becoming something or moving into a level where we didn't think that we had within us, I feel like that really is the place where the loyalty is captured to the leader, that brings us into a place where we didn't actually know it was within us. All right, I just wanted to move up on. We're through a few of our points. A leader must know friend and foe alike. A king should be alert. He must study his friends and foes incessantly. So if we remember, just going back to the presentation from the exercise that Ed had, and just as a reminder, this was the opportunity that we took to do a SWOT analysis. If people remember, we had done this, and if you haven't, it's still a good opportunity to go back and do this. But this was really, this was one of the practical exercises we had to do, where we, we were looking at everything around us. And then if people remember, there was also the exercise where we tried to appreciate something about our enemies, regardless of maybe how challenging that was. If people remember, this was coupled with this exercise. One was the SWOT, and the second was looking at our enemies and seeing what they're doing well, something that we appreciate, and taking that in to kind of help apply this principle of studying foes and friends alike. Any reflections from what they did as part of their exercise, or anything they wanted to share on this point? This is I feel like this one is really powerful as a learning opportunity when we're ready to move into it. This idea of studying both the people that are supporting us, and yet the people who are also who challenge us to be better. Any comments? All right, so really the point here. Yes, Avni.
So the deeper and deeper I get into this my self-development, I steer more into studying my foes. Like, I just want to stretch myself. I don't know. I mean, I've always been on the friend side, but it's as if I go and look for foes. Okay, right. So what do I have to learn in this situation? Tell me. It just gets more and more interesting, and it's not interesting if everyone's nice around you and everybody actually follows what you're doing. And so yeah, that's very interesting for me, because I used to find it very tricky, very, very tricky. So yeah.
Yeah, and it speaks to also the point of just being around people that are consistently better at what we're trying to do, and also people that may give us feedback that is not what we want to hear. I think there's always a leaning towards trying to surround, as leaders, surrounding ourselves with people that are yes people, or encouraging of what we're doing. It's always really important, and not always easy to accept the the advice or the constructive criticism that also comes with it. But I feel is very vital for us to really push ourselves to the next level.
And it gives you that playing field of practicing all those necessary qualities. You know, it really gives you that good practice.
Mhm. The next point that was mentioned was one that Avantika had already reflected on, considering one's people before oneself. A king's duties to his people should take care of them with no thoughts of pleasing themselves, should be subordinate to his own, he should subordinate his own wishes and desires to those of the people. You know, one thing that was coming to mind reading this section that I'd love to hear from others is how they balance this point with their own needs day to day, because I think a lot of times, at least I see that sometimes this is hard to apply because of what we have to take for ourselves as the first priority. And you know, it always speaks to me about the principle that when you hear on the airplane of putting your own oxygen mask first before putting out on others. But how do people, at least how have people been able to apply this point in their own, just in their own life? In a practical or sustainable way?
Okay, I'll go first. In the beginning, not very well at all. I think in the beginning, a lot of ego and a lot of missed opportunities of really being a great leader. Somewhere in the middle of the road, better. And then towards, you know, the more recent past, I think quite well, because one realizes that this is a decision and a choice. One always has the, you know, if one is drawn, I love what Robin Sharma says, when your fear and your desire point in the same direction, you know, that has something, that's a very big part of your thing. So I think one of the reasons that we don't let go of our desires and our personality that we want to be seen as when we are on any kind of a leadership journey is because we believe that we will lose ourselves in the equation. We will not be who we were. And, you know, whether it is, yeah, I think that the biggest fear was that of losing one's identity and one's this thing and becoming just, you know, and in fact, a lot of people used to say it also, you're nothing but, I mean, you're consumed by your mission or by your, you know, your this thing takes over everything. But yeah, so I think that the thing that comes is that looking at the opportunity cost of not doing it. So for instance, for me personally, I've had, you know, a couple of forks in the road, and at each one of them, one of the decision-making tools which was good for me was to identify and model what would life be in this way and what would life be in this way. And obviously it's not a perfect science, but one gets to see that if one is putting one's lower needs, you know, as a priority or the guiding map, then, you know, there's only a certain way that one can go with that, and it becomes a very ordinary life, nothing wrong with that, but, you know, one's purpose isn't really kind of achieved. And on the other hand, you know, there are certain tough calls where one has to abdicate one's biological clock, one's relationships, one's, you know, needs for just having a regular normal life. And, you know, instead of working tirelessly to come up with a solution for what the world needs right now, just going out there, watching a movie with friends. And sometimes there's always room for that. But I think it's a question of taking a look at how happy one would be in the bigger picture when one is really called to evaluate one's life, what could one really have wanted to be there? So I think it's a battle within oneself, which there's certain balancing factors which come up, and the longer you're on the road, the easier it gets, because I think, and that's why they believe, they said that perhaps you can't really be a very good leader till you're 35, is because there's a certain level of ego death which does need to take place, which I believe personally from my experience and from all the people I've kind of worked with, doesn't really start happening till you're in your mid-30s, and that's okay. You should take your first 30 years of your life to just live and just, have fun. But I think after that, there comes a point in your life where you start looking at more meaning, more purpose. And it's great. Some people get that at 12, some people get that as 35, like I did. But whatever age that happens is irrelevant. It's more important. I think it coincides with ego death a little bit and more need for the same. But it has to be a choice. It cannot be something that's thrust on you. It has to be a choice.
Yeah, thank you for this point on just this, point on ego death. I feel that so much of the leadership positions we take on, in our younger years of life, there's many blind spots, and there's many like areas of self-awareness that we don't realize. And, when I look back on previous leaderships that I've been in, I thought, wow, I was just really unaware, and I was completely, what's the point? Overestimating my abilities, if I could just put it that way, simply. And there's a certain level of grounding that has to come about our limitations, for sure. One thing that when I was reading this point that came to me is just this idea of self-care in our journey of leadership. And I've come to have to appreciate the point where, you don't take this as like self-care is not being something that you're taking for one's pleasure, but it's in fact it's necessary for one's maintenance to be able to continue to lead others. So because I had to really shift my, lens on how I viewed, either taking one time for oneself. And I think the point becomes is, I think we all know we take what we need, and then we're frivolous about what we're taking. And I think just constantly always asking ourselves that, that question where is it kind of for enjoyment, or is it for our kind of maintenance to maintain our own inspiration? Because if our inspiration is not there, then it's really going to be hard to, to support and assist others. So for me, one of the things that was really coming up is just this reconciling of, taking what we need for our own inspiration and our own self-care. Any other thoughts?
Great point. Self-care is so important. And also, I think the aspect of simplification, so minimizing, the other thing that, so not trying to do too much, not trying to solve too many problems. But I love to think of at any given time trying to solve one problem for one person or one audience, and that's it. And so doing less but doing it better makes it easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, versus the jack of all trades, master at none, right? So I'm just going to bring up the next point. This is the next one, the parental spirit. So they should guard them as a mother guards a child. A leader should know his or her constituents as much or as better than a mother knows her children. Sorry, I got cut off. So in this regard, I just wanted to see, do people consistently make an effort to do this? I know for me, it requires a daily thought and effort. I just wanted to get a sense for how other people you know, what other people do to apply this in their day-to-day life. This is a really powerful point because it really speaks to the point that we had discussed, that, you know, if we put the relationship over the project, that the project will naturally, you know, occur. Bye, Avni. Did anyone else have any thoughts or comments on this one? Paul, you haven't said anything. Please share something.
For me, that is actually one of the hard ones. I care about the people that I work with immensely, and I don't necessarily get into asking them a lot on their personal lives and that sort of thing. I'm more about like, how are you? How can I make your world better? And with my leadership team, which is the smaller group that I work with more intensely, there's definitely more of that personal relationship and caring. It's when you get 2 or 3 layers away that gets really difficult, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in certain situations, it won't be practical, but at least for me, I see it as a great reminder of trying to show care for the people, you know, we're taking care of. And for most people, we all know that there's more behind someone in the work they come. Like there's a whole life that we're, you know, very unfamiliar with, right? And I've even seen in this group that the more I've appreciated everyone more, like as the layers have been peeled and we get to know even one small, you know, little thing more about each individual.
Yeah, this has been actually a really, really good recap of the chapters with the important statements in there. It's been a good reflection in the morning.
Nice. We'll just do, I think there's maybe one or two more. I don't know what happened, but they kind of got cut off. But this is it's at the page of 59, and it reads, the king needs to be careful not to place implicit confidence in anyone. They should keep his innermost thoughts concealed from even his nearest and dearest. This is the point on independence. How does that land with, you know, how does that land with everyone? And do they, I can't say that I necessarily think about it on a day-to-day basis.
I don't actually typically think of it that way either, but it doesn't mean that it's not a wise thing to do.
Yeah, good point.
And on that note, I think I am going to be doing a little bit of digging in a few areas, but it's not something that would come naturally to me.
Yeah, the point that he's making in this section, which is short, is that today's friend may become tomorrow's enemy. That's really, from at least the angle of vision that they were, you know, that this point is, you know, being approached from. And
but is this not the point where we get fear or get frightened? If we don't share, or we are thinking it might be an enemy or better than us, then why it is important to give the hand to make them higher? So I cannot understand this point well.
yeah, I agree. I would say that usually, at least just in application, I'd probably still, you know, reveal most of my thoughts to the nearest and dearest. So
yeah, in the ancient time, it might be that the son or the follower might be dangerous,
Mhm.
But for today's leadership, I think this is. I cannot say this is the most important thing, or
Mhm.
to get frightened.
Christina or
Because
Avantika?
on
With
the other
Edward.
hand,
Yeah,
Please.
I'll have to agree with Anwar on this because it seems
Yeah.
more tied to the time that you felt very vulnerable and had to cover your back all the time. But I guess in today's day and age, transparency is something you associate with a good leader. And so maybe, you know, that's something that inspires more confidence, is someone that is transparent with things that, but there's just one small aspect of classified information. So just because you might be dealing, you might have certain information which is on a needs to know basis. For instance, I've been, you know, in charge of centers which had to shut down, right? There's a certain timing that you have to bring that to people's information, so as you know, one of the things as a transparent leader is that I would love to tell everybody that, you know, hey, a month from now, the center shuts down. But, you know, we have responsibilities to our clients because if there's panic in the center, even though we have, so as a good leader, it would be important for me to create a very good succession plan, a very good plan B, just in case, you know, operations don't work. But my primary responsibility is to make sure that the work does not get affected. So you know, just a week before we are ready to set the plan in motion, probably I would time it, even I might have known it 3 months in advance. I would use that time to make sure that nobody's jobs are impacted. We have, you know, a succession for everything. But the timing of telling people would be, so I think that there are certain times when, you know, you've got to take a look at the impact of your sharing and withhold that. But certainly I agree with you, in today's day and age, thankfully, we don't have to live in very mistrustful societies where we kind of keep everything to ourselves, and no longer is knowledge power. So we can share freely.
I think I'm agree also on timing. So this is, but not what do you say? Not triggering point to say because they are getting better than me. So, but it is for this kind of sensitive decisions, timing is an issue. Yes, and it depends on the character of the leader, how they are going to. Some are saying, like you said, promptly and abruptly, and some are sensitive.
Mhm. I see that probably in a previous time that there's probably a tactical application of this point in the time of, let's say, war or battle, or when there's you know, in a space of trying to, you know, conquer maybe new territory, that this would be there. And so I think at least from that perspective, we can see that there may be some tactical application to something like this in a, you know, in a specific circumstance.
I think it actually also comes down to circumstance, to your point, Rick. And like right now, I have an instance on my leadership team where I have a reason to have concern. So in that instance, definitely being careful about telling people what the concern is and what I'm doing to look into it would not be wise. So it's a fine line between trusting and knowing when not to, even to Avantika's point.
Mm-hmm. I also see, I mean, just to build on that, when the leader has to gather information to understand a situation, I think that in that process of listening and gathering information, I think there's also a period there where we withhold our, you know, our opinion or our thoughts to approach something from at least a, you know, a space where we're trying to be objective in that moment.
True. And another area I think it might come in useful to follow this is when one is trying to protect intellectual property. So, you know, someone might be trying to get close to you under the guise of, you know, as over here in the olden times, they're called spies, but even today, there's a lot of identity theft, a lot of intellectual theft that takes place. So it's important for a leader who holds many things. And the last area where I feel this might be this thing is to make sure that one is not developing biases. Because I've been in situations in the past where I've been close to a few people in my team and not so close to a few people in my team on a personal level. I'm talking about when I was much younger, but I have made the mistake of the people that I was close to knowing more than the people that I was not close to. So I think it's good to kind of have these checks and balances in place so that one is always aware that, you know, just because human nature sometimes overtakes you, right? So it's important just kind of have certain grounding principles in place.
Yeah, no, thank you for, again, both of those points. I don't know so much about intellectual property, but I'm interested in learning more about this point that you're making, but I can see that how it could unfold. We'll just go through one more last point, which so this last point here that we'll reflect on today is recognizing one's own weakness. A king needs to know when to seek protection in their fort. When the position is weak, they should be ready to make peace with a foe who is stronger. And if you remember the exercise that we did, you know, as a way to apply this point, was this one here. If people recall, writing about a mistake you made or weakness that you have, and this was really the framework that we used to unpack our a mistake or weakness a little bit more. This was a really powerful exercise too. If you haven't done it, it's definitely worth looking at. But I really appreciate this point of just trying to you know, see our weaknesses as a potential blind spot. And really, this is really an area for our growth if we can continue to try to help identify, whether it be through our own self-reflection or having other people, you know, the real kind of people who are helping us guide in our life are the ones that care about us and are willing to give us that feedback to help us uncover our weaknesses. But I really thought that, you know, this is a great self-reflection exercise on its own. Anyone else have any comments here on their recognizing of weaknesses and how they go about that in their day-to-day leadership?
We have to wish this for Putin, huh?
It seems that he wants to surround himself around a group of people that are, you know, approving of his agenda.
Mhm.
But I think we see, like, just the way things are unfolding. I mean, things are crumbling. It seems like, at least appears from the outside, that things are crumbling, you know, from the inside.
Mhm.
Or at least that's how the media is portraying it.
It depends on where your meat is, that's all.
Sure, 100%.
This is what you said, Avantika, the truth. But I think the truth has no sides. So this should be appealed what it is. So at the end it will come out, but this is a long
Absolutely.
way.
The sun has no side. The sun is going to be exactly where it is, but depending on whether you're on Earth, Mars, or Venus, you look at it differently. So the truth is absolute, but people perceive it, but people's perception of the truth is relative to their context and where they're at and what their agendas and the motives are. So yeah, Putin for some people is an excellent leader, and for some people a despot. It just depends on, you know, where they're at. That's it.
Yeah, it's a great point to make about just how that the truth is universal, but how we interpret that is going to be relative. And if you haven't had a chance just to do that exercise, please please take the time to. This one particularly was a great one to learn from our previous mistakes or weaknesses.
Thank you.
Any final comments? So those were really, except for minus maybe one or two, which we can get to, but those are pretty much like all of some of the main ideas that we've discussed up till this point and read more into. Anyone have any closing comments or reflections?
The book is going to be more exciting.
Have you read the whole book already?
Yes, and I am writing all the things what I almost pointed out all the things, but it is very. Thank you very much for this book. This is really appreciated and very valuable.
You're welcome. And just as a closing point, I just wanted to bring us back to something else we talked about right at the beginning, was the 4C code of leadership of courage, compassion, competence, and character. And again, just for our own self-reflection, seeing how these apply to our specific context, I think it's a really great model by which to, look at ourselves. On that note, again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate everyone's time and reflections. I got a lot out of today of just reviewing everything myself. And I hope everyone felt in the course of the discussion that there's some area that they'd like to shine the light on a little bit more for themselves.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you so much. It's just phenomenal. I had one request, and maybe I'll put that's directed to you, Rikin. The year end is coming up. I'd love to do a reflection on The Dark Night of the Soul once again. If you could do a recap session for us, because it's just been a powerful book.
Yeah.
I think that, now that it's been a year almost, I would love to kind of do a recap. So if you could organize that between now and the end of the year, that would be just amazing.
Yeah, sure, I will. And if it's possible, I will also try to reach out for Simon to join us.
Wow. This one.
Yeah, I'll he just sent me a voice note yesterday. He's quite busy in his PhD, but thank you for just bringing up the idea. And to be honest, I was thinking of just doing a recap for myself, so I'm happy for us to do it as a group as well.
Let's do it.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Till
Very
next
nice
week.
proposal.
Again, thank you so much, and really appreciate everyone's being here.
Bye-bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Have a great week.